Welcome to the Conversation Lab. I'm Don Schaefer. I was thinking about reconciliation this week and getting depressed and bluesed because of how few of the recommendations we've done of the 94. And then I found an earlier interview with Chief Robert Joseph and David Patterson that I thought I'd share. Today we're honored to have both Chief Robert Joseph, Ambassador of Reconciliation Canada, and David Patterson, who's a member of the Reconciliation Canada's Board of Directors, with us. Chief Joseph is the hereditary chief of the Gwakwinok First Nation, a member of the National Assembly of First Nations Elders Council, was formerly the executive director of the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, and is an honorary witness to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC. Chief Robert Joseph received the Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue in 2014, and in 2003, he received an honorary law degree from UBC. David Patterson is a Vancouver lawyer who has spent more than 30 years practicing in the field of Aboriginal rights. For 4 years, he was the chair of the Committee on Indigenous Peoples for the International Bar Association, and he's consulted internationally on the rights of Indigenous peoples. David was also part of the legal team that brought the class action concerning Indian residential schools, which resulted in the settlement of residential school claims in 2005. It's an honor to welcome you both to our studios. I guess the place to start is, what does reconciliation mean to you?
Well, reconciliation is a process of bringing together. Reconciliation is a process of addressing and resolving differences in such a way that everybody's needs are met. Reconciliation is a way of promoting community. So in a very general sense, it's talking about, in terms of Reconciliation Canada, the kind of country we want to have, a country that addresses its history, a country that recognizes its problems as well as its strengths and seeks to positively address those.
Chief Joseph, you said that the reconciliation includes anyone with an open heart and an open mind, which I thought was a nice way to frame
all of the difficulties and challenges we've had over Canada's period, we've not been able to do a very good job of being inclusive and being truly just in ways that justice should prevail. And equality hasn't been a mantra for anybody. And Aboriginal people, by and far, have been left far behind. And I think that in this time of reconciliation, when so many Canadians, 7 out of 10, first of all, said they wanted to reconcile, then 8 out of 10 in a subsequent poll said they want to reconcile. All we need for those people to do is come into the process of reconciliation and hear each other out, hear each other's history, and then begin to discover that there does really exist a common humanity for all of us. And we begin to vision a future together unlike any we've ever had before in this country. So reconciliation is coming to terms with all of the things we've done wrong, but more importantly, reconciling in a way that we can determine what the future looks like for all of us together. More kinder, gentler, softer, compassionate, caring, loving society.
Have you always been a kinder and gentler man?
No. I left a residential school. I went to residential school when I was 6 years old, and 11 years later, I left a pretty broken spirit, pretty broken man, and I lived out my life in anger for a very long time, dysfunction, some hatred, and just brokenness and despair. And those were difficult times. For most of us who went to those schools, with those who had those really bad experiences, those impacts resonate in your life and your family and your work, whatever you do afterwards. And it was difficult for me to find some place of peace and contentment and acceptance about who I was, that I indeed had some value and worth, because in those schools, they really beat that out of you. Not all of us, but many of us.
So how do you find that path? What did you do differently, or how did you find your own way out of that?
I had to have some divine help. When I was in that school, I was very lonely all the time, just super lonely. I thought nobody cared, nobody loved me. I wasn't a part of anything or anybody. And when I got out of that school, I came to the conclusion one day that I should get married and that I would have 5 or a lot of kids. And I thought my wife would be my wife forever and my children would be my children forever. But lo and behold, in a few short years after I got married, I just couldn't hold it together. And one day I lost all of that, lost my job, and I wasn't working anymore. And I began to do what I'd always done when I couldn't cope with the stress and the memories, and I would drink lots. So my wife one day wasn't at home anymore, and she took my kids. So I really began to despair and drink a lot, to the extent that one day was just a stupor into the next day with no memory of anything, trying not to remember anything, of course. And a friend of mine said to me, "I don't like what you're doing to yourself." I was almost typically a town drunk by then. And he said, "You should get out of town." And I knew I was in trouble, and I said to him, "Okay, I'll get out of town." So he said, "Go to the boat, we'll go fishing for a day, and at least that'll get you out of here for a little while." So I don't remember how I got to the boat, but I woke up on a boat early the next morning. And I woke up, and I didn't know where I was for a few milliseconds. I could smell the booze oozing out of my pores, and see the darkness of that despair I was undergoing. And then I realized I was in his boat, and I looked around, and all of the crew members were still asleep, and I got off the bunk, snuck out to the back of the boat, and there was not another human being in sight, not another boat at all. And I went to the very stern of the boat and began to fall at the stern behind this huge big drum on a fish boat. And as I fell to my knees, I couldn't see through my eyes because by then I was crying, and I said, "God help me." And that wasn't a prayer because I've been pretty angry at God for a while. But as soon as I said that, I started to see through the tears and see clearly the ocean. And I'd never seen an ocean like it, just coral blue with energy. And I elevated my gaze, and I saw Vancouver Island on the other side of the channel, and looked at the forests, and it was lush and green and thick. It had lightning bolts through it. And finally, I was gazing up to the heavens, and I heard this voice say to me, "In spite of what you've done to yourself, I love you, and you're a part of all of this." And then, of course, I came back to the moment, and over time sought other help. But I knew from that epiphany that as far as the Creator was concerned, I had some value and purpose, and I belonged, and I was connected to all of this. And it sort of inspired me to believe that I was part of something pretty big. And over time, the residential school legacy became a public issue. And afterwards, I was engaged with David in a lot of the meetings with survivors and church people and government people. And we struggled, all of us, in finding a way to respond to that horrific sort of period in which I had just come through, and so many other little Aboriginal children had just come through. So it's been an inspiring road back. And I don't think I could have done it on my own. I really needed divine intervention to be here. And now I believe in the worth of every human being. If we're Canadians, all of us have worth and value and purpose, and we do better if we're together, holding each other up, lifting each other up, caring for each other, leaving nobody behind, making sure every child achieves their optimum potential. Those are the things I really honor now and want to see come about. So I've sort of committed myself to working in whatever way I can in bringing that about. I have no formal education or anything like that, but I have lots of energy and some insight, I think.
You would definitely be a Rhodes Scholar. You know, they say everything happens for a reason, and for the folks or for the people that reached out a hand to you, you've been doing that for a lot of years to other people. So it's nice to be able to reach out and help. And you and David have been working together for a long time.
Yeah, I would think probably more than 20 years.
How did you meet?
Well, it would have been in the context of the residential school matter. Now, I've been working on residential school cases as a lawyer for 23, 24 years, quite a long time. And in that context, I had contact with a lot of people in the First Nations community who were also working, though not before the courts or in the legal forums. And that would have been where I met Bobby.
I guess I'm struck by the amount of work in the process. And how much more work is there to do?
Well, in a legal sense, most of the work on the residential schools claim itself is done. There's still some loose ends that'll take a few years to sort out, but the vast bulk of the claims have been addressed and resolved and so forth. In a broader sense, there's a great deal of work to be done because, of course, the law simply kicks open some doors where the question of reconciliation in this case, or resolution, social resolution, is put on the agenda. But while the law can provide certain redress for things that happened in the past, the law can't create the future for us. That's something we have to do for ourselves.
Is social resolution possible?
Well, if you're asking a philosophical question, I don't know. But if you're asking an action question, I think you have to believe that. Whether you ever get there or whether it's a direction that you're moving is hard to say. It's like asking, can we ever solve all of our problems? Well, any particular one of them is solvable. Whether any of us will manage to solve them all at the same time is a bit dubious.
I think it comes back to Chief Joseph's comment about if you have an open heart and an open mind, it's possible.
Absolutely. And it's happening as we speak across this country. All differing sectors of Canadian society are already engaged in some ways in promoting reconciliation. Corporations, business, unions, educators, levels of government, business bureau, lots of people are already engaged. And what I think what our challenge is when we look at reconciliation is that we see all of the big strokes all of a sudden, the deep disparity between Aboriginal people and all other people, and the need to respond to huge legal questions and socioeconomic disparities. And if we focus on all of that, then it'll probably take a very long time to consider even that we've started down a road of reconciliation. But when we look at reconciliation as something that every Canadian should look at as a core value, that we need to build ourselves into peaceful, contented individuals, because we can't build it out unless we ourselves possess some of this, it'll be very challenging. So every day we've got to spend reaching out to our neighbors where we live. That's so important. And the reason why that's important is that we get the chance to see each other, hear each other, have a dialogue, have deeper understanding that actually transforms our relationships. If we did it in the ways we've always done it, we go to the courts or we have a political struggle about it and it works out in ways that it usually does, it's going to be a long, long time. And one of the things that I'm very, very interested in happening is this. Even if we achieve all the big strokes like rights and title and economic prosperity, shared prosperity, if we did all that and never had a discussion between Canadians and Indigenous people and other diverse groups about who we are living in this country, we'd be not too far from the walls that are currently up. The attitudes, the racism, the other things that currently divide us. We really, those are the underlying reasons for the despair and brokenness in our community is the racism and the prejudice. And we need to get beyond that and begin to deal with that with other